This might come as a shock to you, but Vice President Mike Pence said that the president should resign over his lies about his adultery. Truly shocking revelation, except he didn't say it about the current president. When I mean that Mike Pence said the president should resign over his lies related to infidelity, he was talking about Bill Clinton at the time. Apparently, when it's Trump, it no longer matters. And this is the same Mike Pence who's so pious and so moral and so Christian, such a good Christian, that he won't have dinner alone with another woman. It needs to have a chaperone there. And there's been a bunch of old columns by Pence that have come to light. And of course, he's talking about Bill Clinton here, but wouldn't it apply 5 times more to Donald Trump? Pence wrote, who knows what year, "If you fall and I fall into bad moral habits, we can harm our families, our employers, and our friends. The president of the United States can incinerate the planet. Seriously, the very idea that we ought to have at or less than the same moral demands placed on the chief executive that we place on our next door neighbor is ludicrous and dangerous. Throughout our history, we have seen the presidency as the repository of all our highest hopes and ideals and values. To demand less is to do an injustice to the blood that bought our freedoms." And then the gold mine calling for the resignation of the president for lying about adultery. Not this president, the previous president, of course, saying our leaders must either act to restore the luster and dignity of the institution of the presidency, or we can be certain that this is only the beginning of an even more difficult time for our land. For the nation to move on, the president must move out. He's also on audio-visual recordings saying very similar things. Take a look at this.
Is adultery no longer a big deal in Indiana and in America? I'd just love to know your thoughts, because I, for one, believe that the 7th commandment contained in the 10 commandments is still a big deal. It's the most important promise you'll ever make. And holding people accountable to those promises and holding people accountable to respecting the promises that other people make, to me, what could possibly be a bigger deal than that in this country?
If only he would hold the current president to that standard. And I point this out not to actually have a conversation about hypocrisy, but to point out that it's all BS. What I mean is political positions, public personas, political issues, making something a big deal or not a big deal. This is all cover for what we've seen happen bigger picture in the United States for the last 30 to 40 years, which is that corporations increasingly control government and our lives. And this is sort of the other side to the Trump fiasco. On the one hand, we have to report on the day-to-day of the Trump administration, the hypocrisy from everyone around him, like Mike Pence in this clip, the lies, the corruption with Russia, the possible obstruction of justice and crimes. It's all real and it's all happening. But the backdrop is that behind the micro of the political theater is that the Trump administration didn't just appear out of nowhere. We have a very flawed democracy, and I don't mean just like how we count votes, first past the post voting. I mean, our political system for decades has been dominated by the false dichotomy of Democrat versus Republican, when it's been two parties that allowed corporate power to build where the individual now barely counts. And yes, all the time I tell you, Democrats and Republicans are different on many issues. What the minimum wage should be, net neutrality, important differences, and we've got to vote the current regime out in November. But elected officials from both parties for decades stand aside. They benefit from the status quo. No one gets the corporate and dark money out of politics. And I question, of course, whether any of them want to, since the status quo got them elected. And then the majority of the political debate is playing to the narrow debate where there's no real questioning of the systems that got us here at large. Campaign finance, yes, that is a meta questioning of the system, and people are doing it. Some people are doing it, but not in a way where the protests and the civil disobedience are actually going to change what's going on. How did Trump win the Republican primary? Okay, that's an important question. Do his supporters realize that they've been bamboozled? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. It matters. But the big issue is how corporate power has subjugated both Democrats and Republicans. None of that would have changed whether it's Hillary or Trump. Major consequences between Hillary versus Trump. Which wars will be started? How many lives will Trump ruin? But the status quo pushes ahead, and this Pence hypocrisy about resignation based on lying about infidelity, it's just another data point that it is all political posturing. 95% of what we hear from our elected officials on both sides is political posturing. I am thrilled to tell you that today's episode is sponsored in part by Blinkist.com/Pakman. Blinkist is a really unique service for your phone, tablet, and web browser. And it is incredibly useful for people like me who love books and learning but are busy. Blinkist takes the best and most popular nonfiction books and condenses them into 15-minute audiobooks. I'm sure that if you're like me, you have a very long list of books that you've been meaning to read. You only have so many hours in the day, and that's why Blinkist is so amazing. They take the most important information, the themes, the insights from each book, and they distill it into a 15-minute audiobook that you can listen to in one sitting. I've listened to a ton of books on Blinkist. Our audience can get a 7-day free trial by going to Blinkist.com/Pakman. If you're watching on YouTube, I put a link in the description. I have listened to Blinkist books about economics, about political science, about history, about science. So many interesting things. And after the free trial, if you like it, you can continue enjoying thousands of condensed audiobooks for about $5 a month. Go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. That's BLINKIST.com/PAKMAN.